There were certain kinds of grief that did not fade so much as they settled, like fine dust, over every surface of a man's life. For 5 years, Elias Thorne had lived inside such a grief. It had muted the sharp gold of the Colorado sun, quieted the boisterous winds that swept down from the mountains, and turned his sprawling ranch into little more than a collection of chores that marked the passage of days. His world had become small, contained by the boundaries of his fence lines and the edges of a memory. The memory was of Sarah, of her laughter in the kitchen and the particular way she had of humming when she worked in her garden. She was gone, and with her, Elias had assumed, so was the part of him that knew how to feel anything other than the dull ache of her absence. He lived and worked just outside the small town of Millhaven, a place that clung to the foothills like a burr on a saddle blanket. It was a town of practical people, where a man's worth was measured by the straightness of his fences and the health of his livestock. Elias was a good rancher. His cattle were strong, his barn was sound, and his word was trusted. He did his business, collected his supplies, and returned to the profound and unwavering silence of his empty house. He did not expect more from life, and he did not ask for it. The world had taken enough from him already. It seemed foolish to offer it another target. His weekly trip to town was a ritual, as unchanging as the seasons. He would visit the bank, speak with the freight agent, and end his circuit at Thompson's Mercantile, the general store that had served Millhaven for 40 years. It had always been run by old Mr. Thompson, a man whose spine had curved into a permanent question mark from a lifetime of leaning over his counter. But one Tuesday in late spring, Elias walked in to find the store changed. The air felt different, clearer somehow. The familiar, dusty scent of grain and leather was still there, but it was undercut with the clean smell of soap and fresh lumber. And behind the counter stood a woman he had only ever seen in passing. She was Mr. Thompson's niece, Clara May, who had come to take over the store now that her uncle's health was failing. The first thing Elias noticed, the thing no one could help but notice, was her height. She stood nearly as tall as he did, her shoulders straight and her presence filling the space in a way her stooped uncle never had. Her hair was the color of dark honey, pulled back simply from a face that was handsome rather than pretty, defined by a steady gaze and a mouth that seemed inclined to thoughtful silence over easy smiles. Elias approached the counter, his hat held in his hands, as was his habit. He needed a specific type of hardened nail for repairing a section of corral that his bull had taken a dislike to. He began to describe it, fumbling with the words, but she cut him off with a slow, deliberate nod. "The square-cut steel ones," she said, her voice lower than he'd expected, and calm. "For dense wood. You don't want them splitting the posts." She turned without waiting for his confirmation and walked directly to a set of drawers in the back. Her movements were efficient, devoid of any wasted motion. She returned with a small cloth sack that felt heavy in his palm. It was exactly what he needed. He paid, mumbled his thanks, and left. But as he rode home, the brief encounter stayed with him. It was not her height that lingered in his mind, or the quiet confidence of her voice. It was her competence. She had understood his need before he had fully explained it. She had seen the problem, not just the customer. In a life that had become a blur of solitary work, that small moment of being clearly seen felt strange, like a patch of frozen ground thawing unexpectedly under his boots. The following week, he found himself manufacturing a reason to go back. He told himself he was running low on coffee, though he knew there was a half-full tin in his pantry. When he entered the store, she was on a short ladder, her long arms reaching up to arrange tins of peaches on the highest shelf. She moved with an unhurried grace that seemed at odds with her tall frame. She saw him enter but did not rush, completing her task before descending the ladder and placing it neatly against the wall. "Mr. Thorne," she acknowledged with a slight nod. He was taken aback that she remembered his name. He had been coming to this store his entire life, but he and her uncle had rarely exchanged more than a dozen words. He felt a faint flush of color rise on his neck. "Coffee," he managed to say, gesturing vaguely toward the shelves. She got the tin for him, and as she tallied the cost, he noticed her hands. They were not delicate. Her fingers were long and capable, her knuckles slightly calloused. They were the hands of someone who worked, who fixed and built and managed things. He thought of Sarah's hands, which had always been soft and smelled of the roses she tended. The comparison brought a familiar pang of guilt, and he quickly looked away, paid his coin, and left without another word. This became the new pattern of his weeks. He would find some small, necessary item to purchase, a length of rope, a bag of salt, a new whetstone. Each visit was a quiet study. He watched her deal with other customers, her patience unwavering whether it was a child struggling to decide on a penny candy or a frustrated farmer complaining about the price of seed. She listened more than she spoke, and when she did speak, her words were measured and direct. There was no pretense about her, no performance. She was simply, solidly, herself. One afternoon, he saw her outside the store, wrestling with a heavy crate that the freight wagon had just delivered. Two men stood smoking on the boardwalk nearby, watching her with idle amusement. Elias felt a surge of something hot and unfamiliar in his chest. He tied his horse's reins to the hitching post and strode toward her. "Let me get that for you, Miss Thompson," he said, his voice rougher than he intended. She paused, looking at him. There was no hint of helplessness in her eyes, only a calm appraisal. "I can manage it," she said. It was not a dismissal, but a simple statement of fact. "I know you can," he replied, surprising himself with his own directness. "But you shouldn't have to." He took one side of the crate, and she took the other, and together they carried it inside. The weight was nothing divided between them. As they set it down, their hands brushed, and he felt a jolt, faint but undeniable. He retreated quickly, his face burning, and bought a box of shotgun shells he did not need before making his escape. He was not the only one who had noticed Clara May Thompson. Widow Morrison, a woman whose eyes missed nothing in Millhaven, stopped him on the street one day. She had been a dear friend to Sarah, and her kindness to Elias in the years since had been a quiet, steady thing. "You spend a lot of time in that store lately, Elias," she observed, her gaze sharp but not unkind. "Just getting supplies," he said, his eyes fixed on the distant mountains. She made a soft sound, a little hum of disbelief. "She's a good woman. Capable. Honest as the day is long." She paused, letting the words settle. "A person can get used to being alone. So used to it they forget it's not the only way to be." He did not answer, just tipped his hat and continued on his way. But her words followed him, burrowing into the quiet corners of his mind. He had thought his loneliness was a monument to Sarah, a permanent state of being. He had never considered it might just be a habit and one that could be broken. The idea was unsettling. It felt like a betrayal. His confusion deepened with each visit. He began to see things beyond her competence. He saw the way she gave a piece of licorice to a crying child when his mother was not looking. He saw the way she kept a small bowl of water by the door for the stray dogs that roamed the town. He saw the way the gold evening light caught in her hair when she stood in the doorway at closing time, looking out at the mountains as if she were memorizing them. He was discovering, with a slowness that felt painful, that he liked watching her. He liked the sound of her voice and the steady, thoughtful look in her eyes. He liked being in the same room with her, even if they did not speak. The realization did not come in a flash, but as a gradual dawn he fought against seeing. This new feeling was a complication, a disruption to the sad, orderly peace he had built for himself. The disruption took on a new urgency with the arrival of Mr. Harris. He was a banker from Cannon City, a man with a polished look and an easy smile. He began making the trip to Millhaven every Thursday, his buggy always clean, his suit always pressed, and his destination was always Thompson's Mercantile. Elias was at the feed store across the street the first time he saw him. Harris leaned against the counter, talking to Clara May, making her laugh. It was not just a polite smile. It was a genuine, open laugh that made her whole face light up. Elias felt something clench hard in his gut. It was an ugly, possessive feeling, and he hated it. He loaded his grain sacks with unnecessary force, his jaw set tight. For weeks, he endured the sight of Mr. Harris. He would time his own trips to town to avoid Thursdays, but sometimes their paths would cross regardless. He would see them walking along the boardwalk, or sharing a pot of coffee inside the store. Harris was a good man, by all accounts. He was polite, successful, and clearly taken with Clara May. He was everything a woman would want. And Elias was a ghost. He was a man living in a house with another woman's memory, a man who had forgotten how to speak the language of the living. The turning point came on a cool autumn evening. A harvest festival was being held in the town square. Elias had no intention of going. But one of his fences had broken and he needed to go to the blacksmith for a new gate latch. As he rode through town, the sounds of music and laughter felt like they were from another world. He saw Clara May standing near the bandstand, a cup of cider in her hand. Mr. Harris was at her side, leaning in to speak to her. She was listening, a small, pensive smile on her face. She looked beautiful in the lantern light, her tall frame a point of stillness in the swirling crowd. Elias felt a cold dread wash over him. It was the feeling of a man watching a ship sail away from shore, realizing too late that everything he owned was on board. He saw his future stretching out before him. The same empty rooms, the same silent meals, the same slow fading of days into years. But now, the silence seemed less like a peaceful tribute and more like a punishment. He dismounted and led his horse into the shadows of an alleyway, unable to look away. He watched as Mr. Harris offered her his arm, and she took it. They began to walk toward the edge of the square, their heads close together. This was it. This was how it happened. A good woman found a good man, and they built a life. It was the most natural thing in the world, and he was just a spectator. As he stood there, shrouded in darkness, Widow Morrison appeared at his side as if summoned from the earth itself. She did not seem surprised to find him there. "You've been staring at her all evening," she said, her voice soft. It was not an accusation. "I was just passing through," he lied, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. She ignored the lie. "He's a fine man, that Mr. Harris. Steady, kind. He has asked her to marry him." The words struck Elias with the physical force of a blow. He felt the air leave his lungs. He had known it was coming, but hearing it spoken as a fact was different. It made it real. "She hasn't given him her answer yet," the widow continued, her eyes on the couple as they disappeared from view. "She's a woman who thinks things through. But a good man won't wait forever, Elias. And she deserves a good man." She placed a gentle hand on his arm for a moment, then turned and walked away, leaving him alone with the hollow echo of her words. He stood there for a long time, the sounds of the festival fading into a dull roar in his ears. He finally understood. His grief for Sarah was real and it was deep, but he had been using it as a shield, hiding behind it so he wouldn't have to face the world again. He had let his loss define him for so long that he had forgotten he was still alive. And in his blindness, he had failed to see the remarkable woman who had been standing right in front of him, week after week. The ride home was a blur of cold wind and churning thoughts. The stillness of his house felt different that night. It was not peaceful, it was suffocating. He lit a lamp and walked into the parlor, a room he rarely entered. A framed photograph of Sarah sat on the mantelpiece. He picked it up, tracing the line of her smile with his thumb. He had loved her with all his heart. But he was not that same man anymore. 5 years of solitude had changed him. And loving her, he realized with a sudden, painful clarity, did not mean he was forbidden from loving again. It did not mean he had to live out the rest of his days alone. He knew what he had to do. The knowledge was terrifying. It filled him with a profound sense of his own inadequacy. What could he possibly offer a woman like Clara May? A quiet house full of ghosts. A man who was slow and clumsy with his own heart? But the fear of trying was, for the first time, less than the fear of not trying at all. The thought of her saying yes to Mr. Harris was a vision of a door slamming shut forever. He did not sleep that night. He sat in his kitchen, watching the pale winter light creep over the mountains, and made a decision. He would not let his life be a story that had already ended. The next morning, he rode into town. He did not go to the bank or the feed store. He went straight to the mercantile. His heart hammered against his ribs, a wild, unfamiliar rhythm. He saw Mr. Harris's buggy tied up outside, and his resolve faltered. He almost turned his horse around, but the memory of Widow Morrison's voice stopped him. He dismounted, his legs feeling unsteady, and walked to the door. He pushed it open. The little bell chimed. Clara May and Mr. Harris were standing by the counter, talking quietly. They both looked up as he entered. Mr. Harris gave him a polite nod. Clara May's expression was unreadable, her gaze steady. Elias felt the eyes of both of them on him. He had no plan, no eloquent words prepared. All he had was the raw, desperate truth. He walked to the counter, stopping a few feet away. He did not look at Harris, he looked only at her. "Miss Thompson," he began, his voice hoarse. "Could I have a word with you? Alone?" The silence in the store was absolute. Mr. Harris's polite smile faltered. He looked from Elias's stark face to Clara May's calm one. He was not a foolish man. He saw what was happening. With a quiet dignity, he straightened his coat. "Clara May," he said softly, "I will wait for your answer." He gave her a small, sad smile, tipped his hat to them both, and walked out of the store. Now they were alone. The air was thick with unspoken things. Elias's hands were clenched into fists at his sides. He had to force the words out. "I'm slow," he said, the admission costing him more than he could have imagined. "I know I'm slow, and I've been blind." She said nothing, just watched him, her patience a tangible thing in the room. Her stillness gave him the courage to go on. "I haven't been coming in here for supplies," he confessed, the words tumbling out now. "Not really. I've been coming in here to see you. I didn't know it myself until last night. Until I thought I was going to lose the chance." He took a deep breath. "I know he's a good man, and I know I have no right to ask, but I am asking. Don't give him your answer yet. Give me a chance. Let me come calling. Properly." He finished, his chest heaving, the silence rushing back in to fill the space his words had left. He had laid himself bare. He stood there, waiting for her rejection, for the polite dismissal he was sure he deserved. She looked at him for a long moment, her head tilted slightly. A faint, knowing smile touched her lips, a smile he had never seen before. It was gentle and a little wry. "Elias," she said, and the sound of his first name on her tongue made his knees feel weak. "You got there." He stared at her, uncomprehending. "You got there," she repeated softly. "I was wondering how long it would take." A beat of silence passed, and then she gave her answer. "Yes, Elias. You may come calling." Relief washed over him so powerfully, he felt dizzy. It was a feeling so immense it was almost painful, the breaking of a dam that had held back a river of feeling for 5 long years. He could only nod, unable to speak. Their courtship was as quiet and practical as they were. There were no grand gestures or poetic declarations. Instead, there was a steady, comfortable building of a life, brick by brick. He came to supper at the small apartment she kept behind the store. He told her about his ranch, about the rhythms of the seasons and the personalities of his animals. She listened, her chin resting in her hand, her intelligent eyes seeming to understand not just his words, but the spaces between them. She, in turn, told him about the store, about the ledgers and the orders, and the complex web of credit and trust that held the small community together. He learned that her mind was as sharp as any man's he knew, and her heart was kinder. She was a woman who saw the world clearly, without illusion, and met it with unwavering strength. One evening, sitting at her small kitchen table, he found himself telling her about Sarah. He spoke of their life together, of the joy and the sudden, shattering loss. He had never spoken of it so freely to anyone. Clara May did not offer platitudes or sympathy. She just listened, her hand resting near his on the table, a silent anchor in the storm of his memory. When he was finished, a great quiet settled in the room. "It is a good thing to have loved so well," she said simply. Her words did not erase his grief, but they gave it an honorable place. They allowed it to be a part of his story, not the end of it. In that moment, he knew he loved her. The feeling was different from what he had felt for Sarah. It was not the fire of first youth, but a deep, slow-growing warmth, like the heart of a long-burning hearth. It was a love born of respect and admiration, a love that saw and accepted all that he was, including the parts of him that were broken. He helped her. On Saturdays, he would come into town and help her unload freight, his strength making quick work of the heavy barrels and crates. She would mend his shirts, the stitches small and perfect, her capable hands moving with a practiced rhythm. They took walks by the creek that ran behind the town, their silence as comfortable as their conversation. They were two solitary people learning the language of we. A few months after he first came calling, he rode home one evening and went directly to a small wooden chest at the foot of his bed. He opened it. Inside, nestled in a velvet box, was his mother's wedding ring. It was a simple band of gold, worn smooth with time. He held it in the palm of his hand, the metal warm against his skin. It felt right. The next evening, he and Clara May walked to their usual spot by the creek. The sun was setting, casting the mountains in shades of purple and rose. He stopped and turned to face her. He did not have a speech prepared. He only had the simple truth. "Clara May," he said, his voice steady. I would be honored if you would be my wife. He opened his hand and showed her the ring. She looked from the ring to his face, and her eyes were bright. Her smile was the one he had seen that first day, the one that lit her from within. I'd want that, she said softly. Her yes was not a surprise, but a conclusion. It was the final, right-fitting piece of a puzzle he hadn't even known he was solving. He slipped the ring onto her finger, and it was as if his whole life had finally settled into place. 5 years later, Elias Thorne stood on the porch of his ranch house, a cup of coffee warming his hands in the crisp morning air. The house was no longer silent. From inside, he could hear the sound of his wife humming as she prepared breakfast, a sound that had become the bedrock of his world. The happy shrieks of their 2 children, a boy with his dark hair and a girl with her mother's steady eyes, spilled out from the open kitchen window. He watched as Clara May stepped out onto the porch, wiping her hands on her apron. She had not been diminished by marriage or motherhood. If anything, she seemed more herself than ever. She stood beside him, her tall frame a familiar and comforting presence, and looked out over the land that was now theirs together. The ranch was thriving, bigger and more prosperous than it had ever been. Her sharp mind had been as valuable to its success as his strong back. She leaned her head against his shoulder for a moment, a simple gesture that contained the entirety of their shared life. It's a good morning, she said. It is, he agreed, his arm going around her. He looked at his wife, at his children chasing a butterfly in the yard, at the solid house and the sprawling land, and a wave of profound gratitude washed over him. He thought of the man he had been, a ghost haunting the ruins of his own life, and he felt a deep, abiding wonder at the grace that had been shown to him. He had been a man who had stopped seeing the world, and the world, in its kindness, had sent him a woman he could not possibly miss. The greatest things are often nearby, waiting patiently to be seen, and the deepest love is sometimes not a thing that is found, but a thing that finds you. It is never too late to be pulled back into the light, to be reminded that a heart, no matter how wounded, is made to be whole. Love is not guaranteed to wait forever, but for the lucky few, it waits just long enough.